Teaching helps me stay young. The classroom keeps me in touch with modern slang, trends, and new music that would never make my playlists otherwise. It also exposes generational gaps, sometimes in surprising ways. I slipped in, just barely at the tail end of Gen X, a group known for independence and self-reliance. Their successors, the millennials, are often seen as lazy and entitled. I first noticed this shift during a lesson on the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates, or Socrates for any Gen Xer who remembers the brilliance of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. In his honor, I run a Socratic seminar in a fishbowl format, where large groups tackle the same question. Early in the semester, I always ask, what makes someone smart? The first group usually dives in head first. They land on the ideas that there are multiple types of intelligence. As they talk, they build a framework, book smarts, street smarts, and debate whether one matters more than the other. The second group builds on that foundation. They examine a set of individuals: Albert Einstein, a genius who struggled in school; Michael Jordan, a gifted athlete who became an owner; Homer, the blind poet credited with the Iliad and the Odyssey. And just for fun, I throw in Homer Simpson, a fictional nuclear safety inspector. In order to work in current events, the last person discussed is always the sitting president of the United States of America. Following the Socratic method, I let the students drive, interrupting only to ask Socrates' favorite question: why? I noticed the generational divide during the first administration of Donald Trump. At the time, I lived in a purple district, so I expected a split, half the class arguing he was intelligent, the other half insisting he wasn't. But then something unexpected happened. When presented with evidence that many of Donald Trump's businesses had failed, the group came together around a single conclusion: that he was a genius. To a Gen Xer, a failed business signals mistakes. Failure reflects poor decisions. Millennials see it differently. They've been taught to embrace failure, to see it as a growth opportunity. Historian Neil Howe explains that bestsellers argue that failure and disorder benefit individuals and institutions alike. Meanwhile, on college campuses, commencement speeches have become an opportunity for luminaries from various fields to share stories of their failures. An NPR analysis of popular speeches going back to 1974 identified "embrace failure" as the sixth most popular theme. The result is a culture where failure is not only destigmatized, but also considered empowering. Rather than move on from setbacks, people are encouraged to examine them, and those who fail repeatedly are told not to give up. And yes, failure can lead to success, but sometimes failure isn't an option. Richard Betts, one of the foremost scholars of intelligence failures, points out that most major wars since 1939 have begun with surprise attacks. Hindsight reveals that the element of surprise in most of these attacks was unwarranted. Substantial evidence was available to the victims before the fact. The high incidence of surprising is itself surprising. He wrote that in 1980. It applies just as well to the events leading up to September 11th. America was shocked that morning. But should we have been? Bin Laden had declared war on the United States. He went to CNN to make sure the message was heard. He launched a series of small-scale attacks, escalating them over time. Eventually, the threat grew serious enough that the CIA dedicated an entire unit to tracking him. And yet, just 30 minutes after the attacks, President George W. Bush, aboard Air Force One, was still asking, who did this? In today's episode, I'll examine the years leading up to 9/11, including the intelligence failures of both the Clinton and Bush administrations. This wasn't a partisan failure. It was systemic, and it cost 2,976 people their lives. You're listening to Empires, Anarchy, and Other Notable Moments, a podcast designed for deep dives that assist in the teaching of history. This series focuses upon the terrorist Osama Bin Laden. Episode number 4, The Race to Prevent Disaster. The previous episode covered bin Laden's declaration of war against the United States, along with a series of small-scale terrorist attacks that largely failed to deliver the results al-Qaeda wanted. That all changed in 1998. Tired of the constant noise, the Saudis sent their head of intelligence to meet with Mullah Omar, leader of the Afghan Taliban. The goal? Extradite Osama bin Laden to stand trial in Saudi Arabia. Omar refused. He came from a culture that valued hospitality above all else. A guest invited into one's home was to be protected. Still, bin Laden was drawing dangerous attention to Afghanistan at a time when the Taliban could least afford it. Saudi Arabia was one of only 3 countries that recognized the Taliban as a legitimate government. Without that recognition, the regime remained isolated, cut off from meaningful international support. Omar asked for more time. He promised to consider the request. But the Saudis weren't alone in trying to bring bin Laden in. 3 years earlier, a CIA working group known as Alec Station had been created with a singular mission: stop Osama bin Laden. Its very existence was remarkable. The collapse of the Soviet Union had ushered in a peace dividend, a period when the United States reduced military spending after the defeat of a major enemy. At the same time, Alec Station had to compete for funding against more established threats: Hezbollah, Iran, and Palestinian militant groups. Michael Scheuer was chosen to lead the unit. Historian Peter Bergen describes him as a workaholic with a PhD in history whose full beard, bulging eyes, devout Catholicism, and overall intensity gave him something of the look and vibe of an Old Testament prophet. Abrasive he may have been, but Scheuer had a prophetic understanding of bin Laden. Soon his team of 25 agents and analysts adopted his unofficial mantra: "This guy's gonna kill several thousand Americans." Scheuer built a team made up largely of women. He believed female CIA officers produced better results. While working around the clock to stop the next attack, the group bonded over a shared love of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which had just premiered. They were insular, so much so that other CIA officers referred to them behind their backs as the Manson family. In that metaphor, Scheuer was the cult leader. He would ultimately fail to prevent 9/11, but his work during this period was relentless. He later published several books about the hunt for bin Laden. In 2007, bin Laden himself remarked that if you want to understand what's going on, then read the book of Michael Scheuer. But Scheuer's role in the story is complicated. In later years, his writings appeared to call for the assassination of President Barack Obama. His words were even used by ISIS in an attempt to appeal to American audiences. By 2009, it was clear that Scheuer, once a central figure in the story, had veered deep into conspiracy thinking. We like to believe that intelligent people are immune to that kind of dissent, but they aren't. A Yahoo News article explains that social scientists are closing in on the dark triad: narcissism, psychopathy, and a tendency to see the world in black and white terms. Cognitive biases also make people more vulnerable, but it isn't ignorance, it's overconfidence. The more you think you're right all the time, the more likely you are to buy conspiracy theories, regardless of the evidence. As this story unfolds, you'll likely notice that Scheuer exhibited many of those traits. Gina Bennett was also part of the program. She was the first person at the State Department to recognize that bin Laden posed a serious threat. What makes that remarkable is where she started, as an office clerk in June 1988. 5 years later, as a junior analyst, she presented a paper titled The Wandering Mujahideen, Armed and Dangerous. The classified report was the first formal warning about bin Laden's role as the head of a global jihadist movement. Exactly 3 years and 3 days after that report, the leader of al-Qaeda issued his declaration of war. Historian Lisa Mundy notes that because many of Scheuer's analysts were women, their findings were often undervalued. The male-dominant culture at Langley remained deeply entrenched. In some cases, women used that to their advantage. As Mundy writes, contrary to popular belief, female spies throughout history have traded not on their sexuality, but on their perceived insignificance. Bennett didn't just identify bin Laden as a threat. She also predicted that he would leave Sudan for Afghanistan in 1996. Meanwhile, the vampire slayers at Alex Station gathered enough evidence to secure a sealed indictment against bin Laden in the Southern District of New York. Had they obtained it earlier, they might have been able to extract him from Sudan. Afghanistan would prove to be far more difficult. Still, they began planning to render him to Washington, D.C., a sanitized term for kidnapping. Their first real opportunity came on May 5, 1998. Peter Bergen writes that the plan was for the tribal militia to enter bin Laden's Tarnak Farms compound, kidnap al-Qaeda's leader, take him to a cave outside Kandahar, and hide him there. Bin Laden would then be taken across the Afghan border into Pakistan, where a C-130 would fly him to the United States. The aircraft would carry a modified shipping container outfitted with a restraint chair designed for a tall man. To maintain legal cover, a CIA officer wouldn't read bin Laden his rights until the plane touched down on American soil. By June, Alex Station was rehearsing the operation. One major complication: bin Laden had 3 wives, each with her own residence inside an 80-building compound. No one knew exactly where he would be sleeping on any given night. But the biggest obstacle wasn't logistics. It was hesitation. CIA Director George Tenet ultimately called off the operation. Scheuer was furious. The mission had only a 40% chance of success, but it was still a chance. According to the New York Times, briefing papers also highlighted other options. Each plan had shortcomings, but so did inaction. Sooner or later, bin Laden will attack the United States' interests, perhaps using weapons of mass destruction. Scheuer didn't need hindsight to believe that warning. And with what we know now, a 40% chance of success can feel like a risk worth taking, maybe even the best chance they had. But at the time, no one knew what was coming. CIA legal counsel worried the evidence linking bin Laden to prior attacks was thin. There was a real possibility they could kidnap him, only to see him acquitted in court. After weighing both sides, George Tenet shut the operation down. He never even brought it to President Bill Clinton. Three months later, 2 car bombs exploded almost simultaneously outside U.S. embassies in Africa. It marked the beginning of a devastating run of successful terrorist operations by al-Qaeda. At the time, I was a junior in high school. Because I competed in a speech event called International Extemporaneous Speaking, I understood the significance of what had happened. I even started giving speeches on bin Laden, what he wanted, and how dangerous he was. Not that those 7-minute speeches led to any real action. In most cases, 2 of those minutes were spent delivering memorized canned introductions, designed to hook the audience and hide the fact that I didn't have enough material. Still, it says something. American high school students were talking about Osama bin Laden 3 years before September 11, 2001. That was partly due to his declaration of war, and partly because of how horrific the embassy bombings were. 20 years later, Ambassador Prudence Bushnell was asked what she wanted people to remember about the attacks. She said, "There was a time when U.S. embassies were located on busy urban street corners, across from rail and bus stations, amid bustling commuters, hustling vendors, and awaiting visa applicants. At mid-morning on Friday, August 7, 1998, Osama Bin Laden's al-Qaeda operatives detonated 1,000 pounds of explosives in the rear parking lot of one such embassy, this one in Nairobi, Kenya. Minutes later, another truck bomb exploded outside the gate of the U.S. Embassy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. In Nairobi, 218 people were instantly killed. 172 were neighbors or passers-by. In the embassy, the dead included 46 colleagues, 34 Kenyans, and 12 Americans. The blast injured more than 4,000 people. 400 were severely disabled, 164 endured acute bone and muscle injuries, 38 adults and children were blinded. 15 were totally deafened, 75 suffered severely impaired vision, 49 were left with hearing disabilities. Hundreds of businesses were destroyed or damaged, many of them mom-and-pop stores with little or no insurance. All this because they were near an American embassy that foreign terrorists wanted to destroy. U.S. embassies are now housed in fortresses. Most are unbecoming and inconvenient, but they safeguard the neighbors as well as the people inside. The physical retreat of U.S. embassies from the wider world reflected how bin Laden believed America responded to attacks, and the Clinton administration's response did little to convince him otherwise. In his mind, the United States remained a paper tiger. Even within al-Qaeda, the scale of the death toll raised questions. Some operatives challenged bin Laden directly. He reassured them. The bloodshed, he argued, was necessary. He had even timed the attack to coincide with the Muslim call to prayer. Peter Bergen writes that, in his own mind, bin Laden wasn't committing mass murder. Rather, he was defending Islam. Bin Laden also subscribed to a particularly extreme belief that unless you were fully committed, fundamentalist Muslim, you had no immunity from being killed in this holy war. In other words, even Muslims who adjusted their daily prayers to accommodate work were not devout enough. Not in bin Laden's eyes, at least. In the aftermath, CIA Director George Tenet summoned his top station chiefs and demanded answers. Scheuer responded with confidence. Bin Laden was behind it. That alone should have been enough. But Scheuer went further. He reportedly told Tenet, "Mr. Director, I hope you know that if you had let us proceed with the plan to capture bin Laden some months ago, the attacks on the embassies wouldn't have happened." The attacks were so brazen that the United States had to respond. But timing mattered. For President Bill Clinton, that timing couldn't have been worse. The Monica Lewinsky scandal was reaching its peak, and he was fighting for his political survival. Lewinsky, a White House intern, had engaged in a sexual relationship with the president, a married man. A special counsel, originally appointed to investigate unrelated land deals, uncovered the affair and convened a grand jury. This was Clinton's first term. He was fighting for his reputation, his marriage, his chances at re-election, and even his ability to remain in office. That doesn't mean he ignored foreign threats, but it does mean he had a lot competing for his attention. The embassy bombings occurred on August 7, 1998. 9 days earlier, Clinton agreed to testify voluntarily in exchange for the withdrawal of a subpoena. 8 days before the attack, Lewinsky turned over a blue dress, reportedly containing DNA evidence from their encounters. 2 days before the bombings, she began her grand jury testimony. 1 day before, a federal appeals court allowed leaks from the special prosecutor's office to continue. Clinton's approval ratings were sinking. His options were narrowing. Under normal circumstances, a military response against terrorists might have helped him regain control of the narrative. But 6 months earlier, the film Wag the Dog had been released. Starring Robert DeNiro and Dustin Hoffman, it told the story of a president who manufactures a war to distract from a sex scandal. The timing was uncanny. Rumors of the Lewinsky affair surfaced just weeks after the film's release. The writer later admitted he had been trying to think of something that would never happen in real life. Despite the optics, Clinton moved forward. Bergen writes that President Clinton was eager to respond. On his annual summer vacation in Martha's Vineyard, Clinton alternated between planning for strikes against al-Qaeda and apologizing to his wife Hillary. The president was sleeping on the couch. On August 17th, Bill Clinton became the first sitting president to testify before a grand jury investigating his conduct. Shortly afterward, he addressed the nation and admitted to an inappropriate relationship with Lewinsky. On August 19th, news broke about the DNA evidence on the blue dress. And on August 20th, the United States launched 75 Tomahawk missiles at al-Qaeda targets in Afghanistan and Sudan. Bergen notes that the White House press corps was at Martha's Vineyard expecting a quiet news day. Some of the journalists were watching the relatively new movie Wag the Dog. Clinton knew the criticism was coming. He authorized the strikes anyway. That night, he addressed the American people. Our target was terror, he stated. Our mission was clear: to strike at the network of radical groups affiliated with and funded by Osama bin Laden. At last, the declaration of war had been answered. Unfortunately, the strikes did nothing to hinder or even dissuade bin Laden from his chosen path. In fact, they may have been compromised before they even began. The day before the attack, all American diplomatic personnel were suddenly withdrawn from Pakistan and Kabul. That kind of movement doesn't go unnoticed. It's possible the allied Pakistani government tipped him off, something we'll explore more in the final episode. But the simplest explanation may be the right one. Reports suggest bin Laden asked his bodyguards to choose between two camps. Their choice likely saved his life. 7 of his followers were killed, along with 6 Pakistanis and 20 Afghans. But the camps themselves, built from mud brick using traditional methods, were rebuilt within 2 weeks. Another missed opportunity. Clinton's sense of timing would resurface in 2001. Just hours before the first hijacked plane struck the World Trade Center, the former president was speaking to investors in Australia about terrorism. He told them, "I nearly got bin Laden, and I could have killed him, but I would have had to destroy a little town called Kandahar in Afghanistan and kill 300 innocent women and children. And then I would have been no better than him. And so I didn't do it." At the time, that restraint meant very little to those on the receiving end of the strike. Taliban leader Mullah Omar personally called the State Department, demanding answers for the unannounced attack on his country. Rather than pushing him to expel bin Laden, the strikes had the opposite effect. Omar dug in. When the Saudis returned in September to retrieve their wayward son, they were turned away. In response, Saudi Arabia withdrew recognition of the Taliban government, leaving Pakistan and the United Arab Emirates as its only remaining partners. Omar still refused to hand bin Laden over, but he did confront him. Bin Laden had launched an attack from Afghan soil without informing the Taliban leadership. Honor prevented Omar from betraying his guest, but it didn't stop him from delivering a warning. It would be best if bin Laden left immediately. Osama had no backup plan. He pleaded for time, asking for the same 5 years he had been granted in Sudan. That request was denied. He shifted tactics, making a religious argument. Expelling him, he claimed, would be a crime against Islam. That reasoning worked, at least partially. Omar granted him an extension, 18 months, the same amount of time Sudan had tolerated him. "1999 was a year of diplomatic pressure. Saudi Arabia sent bin Laden's mother with chocolates in a hopeful but naive attempt to persuade him that all would be forgiven if he simply returned home. The United Nations threatened sanctions against Afghanistan, increasing pressure on Mullah Omar to act against his guest. Meanwhile, bin Laden began planning his next move, relocating his base of operations to Yemen, the land of his father's birth. To make the transition more acceptable to local authorities, he sought a Yemeni wife. If you recall earlier discussions on polygamy in Islam, bin Laden had been openly critical of his father, who exploited a loophole to father 52 children with 22 wives. To stay within what he considered proper Islamic limits, his father had insisted that he always divorced a wife before marrying another, ensuring he never exceeded 4 wives at any one time. In his younger, pre-criminal college years, Osama bin Laden even told friends that he would do things the right way, a comment that revealed he viewed his mother not as a full wife under Islamic law, but as something closer to a concubine. So far, he had kept to that rule. He first married his cousin, reportedly for love, or at least for hormones. He later married 3 additional women, each of whom claimed a direct bloodline to the Prophet Muhammad. Rather than simply being seen as wives, they were incorporated into his inner circle as spiritual advisors, sometimes even weighing in on the religious justification for his actions. His second wife, however, had not married a millionaire to live without basic comforts. The marriage ended amicably after 7 years, before the major terrorist attacks covered in this series. Under his father's loophole system, that left an opening for a new 4th wife. I won't pretend to be an expert on polygamy, but bin Laden's next decision seems at best disastrously miscalculated. His existing wives, who had endured years of life on the run and repeated get up and flee into the desert drills to evade American forces, were relatively close in age to him. In the case of his later wives, they had been selected in part for their intellect. In 1999, bin Laden was 42 years old, on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, and married to 3 women within a couple of years of his age. One of them, Hamza, nearly a decade older. With that in mind, he asked a Yemeni matchmaker for a wife who was religious and young enough not to feel jealous of his other wives. They found him Amal al-Sadah, age 16. And if that age gap wasn't enough to destabilize the household, tensions likely weren't helped when bin Laden began dyeing his beard with Just for Men and consuming large quantities of olives for their supposed Viagra-like effects. Meanwhile, the hunt for bin Laden continued. Alex Station remained determined to find another opportunity to strike at al-Qaeda. On Christmas Eve, 1998, President Clinton signed a classified memorandum of notification authorizing the CIA to assassinate bin Laden. This effectively overrode Executive Order 12333, originally issued by Ronald Reagan amid growing reports of CIA-linked covert operations in Latin America. But communication around the order became confused. Clinton believed he had authorized lethal force. The CIA, however, interpreted the directive as, if capture was not possible, they would not be held responsible for killing bin Laden, but only after attempting capture first. On December 20th, 1998, Alex Station received credible intelligence on bin Laden's location while he was sleeping. but the potential for collateral damage was severe. This was the same type of situation Clinton later referenced in his Australia speech. Scheuer again lashed out at his superiors, writing in an email, "Will regret not acting last night." It was the kind of moment that, in hindsight, feels less like a lack of intelligence and more like something else entirely. Because as one Holocaust-era reflection later put it, the opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. Not ignorance, not disagreement, indifference. 2 months later, intelligence indicated bin Laden was on a bird hunt. The remote location meant there would be minimal civilian presence, no nearby towns or businesses to risk as collateral damage. But the operation was called off at the last minute after it was discovered that members of the United Arab Emirates royal family were present. Peter Bergen writes that Scheuer was apoplectic, writing to a colleague that the Clinton administration had passed up half a dozen good to excellent chances to capture or kill bin Laden. He also wrote a memo to every senior official he could think of at the CIA, telling him that when Americans found out that they had not pushed to kill bin Laden, they would have blood on their hands. 2 weeks later, Scheuer was removed from his position as head of Alex Station. He was told he would receive a cash award and a medal for his service. He refused both, telling his supervisor, "If you try to give me a medal and money, they will be back on your desk if I don't shove them up your ass." He was reassigned to CIA library duty. Despite the demotion, he continued working on bin Laden-related analysis whenever he could. The United States did manage to disrupt al-Qaeda's next major plot, a planned bombing at Los Angeles International Airport during the 1999 holiday season. The would-be suicide bomber was arrested after crossing the border via a Canadian ferry. A customs officer stopped him after he said he was headed to a city called Seattle, noticing he was sweating heavily despite the cold December weather. A search of his vehicle uncovered 130 pounds of explosives. With the millennium approaching, the United States went on high alert, though officials kept public messaging limited to avoid panic. Behind the scenes, Richard Clarke, the president's counterterrorism advisor, issued a report warning the White House that foreign terrorist sleeper cells are present in the U.S. and attacks in the U.S. are likely. Still, the next major strike would not come for another 10 months. On October 12, 2000, 2 al-Qaeda suicide bombers detonated explosives alongside the USS Cole, a guided missile destroyer docked in Yemen. The attack killed 12 servicemen and injured 37 others. While secondary to the human loss, the financial damage exceeded $250 million and left the ship out of service for 2 years. Investigators struggled to operate in Yemen, where local sentiment towards the West was hostile. One FBI agent later recalled seeing enough bin Laden construction billboards alongside graffiti reading "Death to America" to connect the broader picture. Inexplicably, President Bill Clinton did not take a visible retaliatory action, instead passing the investigation to the incoming Bush administration. The 9/11 Commission report states that bin Laden anticipated a U.S. response and took precautions to avoid detection. But when no strike came, he reportedly remarked that if it did not come, he would launch something bigger. The report also notes that the attack on the USS Cole significantly boosted al-Qaeda recruitment. Bin Laden ordered his media committee, then led by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, to produce a propaganda video reenacting the attack and showcasing training camps and methods. It also highlighted Muslim suffering in Palestine, Kashmir, Indonesia, and Chechnya. Portions were broadcast on Al Jazeera, CNN, and other outlets, and widely circulated in Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Many young men traveled to Afghanistan afterwards for training and jihad. In other words, bin Laden took a victory lap while the United States worked to confirm he was responsible. When that confirmation finally came, President George W. Bush followed Clinton's precedent by taking no immediate visible retaliatory action. He told Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice that he was tired of swatting flies, and instead ordered the development of a comprehensive strategy to eliminate al-Qaeda. That strategy was still being developed when the calendar turned to September 11, 2001. There was one more al-Qaeda-led attack before the event that would change the course of world history. It would go largely unnoticed in the United States. That was by design. Osama Bin Laden intended it as a calculated move, one meant to ensure he could remain in Afghanistan after the retaliation he knew was coming. It took place on September 9th. The target was Mullah Omar's chief rival. Two al-Qaeda operatives posed as journalists, gained access with forged credentials, and concealed a bomb inside an old television camera. When it detonated, the rival was killed instantly. The purpose wasn't chaos, it was leverage. Bin Laden hoped the assassination would placate Mullah Omar enough to secure his continued protection in the aftermath of what would soon follow, enough to keep him hidden in the Tora Bora Mountains. In the next episode, I'll walk you through the morning that changed everything. While it is a difficult subject, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to interact with the show, you can email us at resourcesbylowery@gmail.com or find us on Bluesky beneath the handle EmpiresPod. If you would like to financially support the show, please look in the description for more information. As always, thank you for listening, rating the show, and spreading the word.